Good afternoon. I'm Molly Young from the Miami University Alumni Association. Thank you for joining us today as we mark International Women in Engineering Day, celebrating this year Inventors and Innovators. Joining us today is alumna and 2022 18 of the last 9 award honoree Aimee Venot and Dr. Beena Sukumaran, Dean of the College of Engineering and Computing. They are here today to talk about the experience of being a woman in the field of engineering. Welcome and thank you to you both for taking the time to join us today. Just a note to our live viewers, you can ask questions during the webinar by clicking the Ask a Question button on the bottom of your screen. And with that, I will turn it over to you two to get the conversation started.
Thank you, Molly. Good afternoon, everyone. It's lovely to meet you, Aimee, and welcome.
Likewise.
And
thank you so much.
Yes, hope to meet you in person very soon. It's good to meet you virtually. And also to alums that are online, especially our women alums. We've had several over the years, lots of success. In fact, lots of successful women engineers and computer scientists that have come from Miami's College of Engineering and Computing. But as a starter, I thought, Aimee, I would also share some statistics just so that we know that we've come a long way, but we also have a long way to go. So in terms of national statistics, if you look at the percent of women in engineering, and this is 2019 numbers, and it's from the American Society of Engineering Education. In terms of percent graduates, it's about 22.4%. Even though women are becoming predominantly the number of college graduates, engineering and computer science has sort of stayed the same. And in fact, I've heard this from several of our alums that have gone through a program from the 60s, 70s onwards, saying that they don't seem to see this number changing much. Or in fact, they might have had more women in their classes in the 70s even compared to what we might have now, right? And it varies by discipline. So environmental engineering, I think, does the best with about 51.7%. And electrical engineering does the worst in terms of 14.4%. And at Miami, we track absolutely along the national numbers. So we are close to 22% women in our engineering and computer science programs. And we do the best in biomedical engineering, and we do the worst in electrical engineering in terms of proportion. And it tracks along the same numbers. So I wanted to talk to you about your experience, Aimee. Why did you choose engineering? Because I always like to hear those stories.
Yeah, absolutely. So growing up, I feel like I love doing math. I also had this part of me that also loved doing art. And I remember in high school, one of my family friends, his career, it was working at Panda Express. He would travel the world and was in engineering, industrial engineering specifically. And he would go and negotiate prices of rice and all these different products. And I thought it was a really cool job, and was asking him, hey, how did you get there? And he said, really focus on mechanical, industrial type fields, because it gives you the discipline of analytics, also how to structure your thoughts thoughtfully. And at that point in time, I was really between kind of three things: engineering, architecture, and graphic design. I think my parents were really pushing out of the graphic design, hoping I would go more towards mathematics, which I'm so thankful they did, because ultimately stumbled upon Miami. I'm from Cleveland originally. I wanted to go to a state school just because of cost, and my parents took me around everywhere. I'm very, very thankful that they did that, and went to Miami and met a professor who's no longer with us, Dr. And he changed my life, really convinced me, like, this is the place to be. Do you like to build things? What do you like to do? And ultimately, I was sold. And so when I received my offer, I was super excited. And I think I signed that same day. So that's ultimately how I started in engineering, and what really got me to Miami.
It's wonderful to hear that, Aimee. And I have heard Professor Etune's name so many times, and I've heard so many of you mentioning that he was key in one of the reasons that you chose Miami. So it's wonderful to hear that from you as well, Aimee. What did you do after you graduated from Miami?
Yeah, so I think Miami does a really nice job focused on bringing alumni back. They spend an enormous amount of time doing that. It's a lot of behind the scenes work, and went to a lot of recruiting fairs. Every time there was one, I would update my resume again, and I would show up in my best outfit and just talk to different folks. And so the options I really had was staying in Ohio or trying out a new city, Chicago. And at that point in time, I was like, I'll try Chicago out. I ultimately knew that I really, really wanted to touch physical products, but this opportunity was in software, which I had a lot of imposter syndrome at the time. Like, I've never done software. My background's in manufacturing. But they promised me that if you have that type of analytical skill set, that you'll be able to coach into that. And so ultimately moved to Chicago. Did a lot of rotational programs. I really wanted like that leadership experience. And so was very fortunate to join a company called Nielsen. I think they're famous for their TV ratings, but definitely do a little bit more than that. And every 6 months, I kind of transitioned into a new project. And so did a lot of software. So managing databases, talking with folks about how we scale those, and traveled a bunch for that. So ended up in New York for a while. But at that point in time, I was really missing that physical product. That was kind of getting back to like that Panda Express. How do I go back to touching things and playing with things? I like still remember fondly like coding like in G code in college to program CNC machines along with 3D printing. And so one of my good friends was like, Aimee, we want you back in Chicago. How do we get you back there? And I mentioned like I've been in the software world for 4 years now, and I really like it. But I think there would be some sort of happy medium between software and physical hardware. And at that point in time, he's like, Aimee, I think you really should come to this startup. It's we are making meal kits. I was like, oh gosh, what are meal kits? And so joined this company called Home Chef, which ultimately then became Kroger later down the line. And so joined Home Chef, working on software that actually helped our manufacturing associates produce those meals that everyone probably has tried once, signed up, and then canceled. But from there, ultimately transitioned into Ruggable, another startup. At the time was very, very small. And we make rugs that you put in your washing machine. And so I'm actually here in LA today, which is probably the lack of poor lighting, but and have been here for, I don't know, the last 2.5, 3 years.
It's wonderful to hear your story and your career path. And some things that when I was listening to you, and I think some common themes that I see with our Miami College of Engineering and Computer Science alumni is because of the way Miami, the curriculum is set up. You have a good foundation in the liberal arts that we build the technical core on. And so I see our alumni actually doing such varied things within the profession. I just think it just makes you so much more adaptable and flexible, and you're willing to try new things. And I definitely think that's one of our secret sauces that we have. And I hear this from even our current students. I mean, I'm always floored by how they balance engineering or computer science with their outside interests, which might be in their arts or fashion or whatever. And they can combine two different majors or combine a major with a minor, right? And I see that even in your career path. And you also touched on the imposter syndrome, right? And I've heard this also from especially lots of women alumni, and I myself as a woman in engineering. I guess the first woman engineering dean at Miami too, right? I still wake up. I mean, I still suffer from the imposter syndrome. Sometimes I think, do I really deserve the position? Do I think I'm qualified for this position, even after having been in the profession? So it also comes from us being in these spaces where we are the underrepresented. I think that also creates some of these issues around confidence sometimes. I know lots of us overcome it using different mechanisms. But can you talk about, I mean, you said you joined Nielsen, right? And you did analytics there, which is completely different from your mechanical engineering background. And it looked like you thrived in that environment. But how do you, say, get past that imposter syndrome and succeed in the profession?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the first thing I always do when I'm feeling this insecurity is asking a lot of questions. One, I feel very grounded. It helps me kind of navigate. And I think one of the things I heard early in my career from someone, when you start out somewhere, it's better to be interested than interesting. And I kid you not, I probably tell myself that once a week. And I remember he told me specifically, later in your career, you can be interesting and less interested. But right now is the time to do that. And what does that mean? I mean, I think one of that is asking questions, being thoughtful, listening, actively hearing what they're trying to say. They may say something, but they're really meaning something different. And I think that's one of the ways that when you said that, this imposter syndrome kind of softened. I also think that I was raised in an environment where I was always told I'd succeed, which I was very fortunate about. Like my dad always would be like, Aimee, you've got this. Like, you can do this. My mom the same way. And so when I got into the engineering school, I don't know how many of us women, I think maybe 5 in MME. One of them I'm still very close with, and we work together today. And I think we just stuck together. And I think because of that, you have this like smaller group within that. I'm trying to think other things that I would say specifically around dealing with imposter syndrome. I think just talking about it with friends and family and your support system. Without a support system, it makes it very difficult. I have a few folks, my partner, my family, my best friends, where I feel it's a safe space to communicate those things, be open and vulnerable, which have really helped me along the way. So I think it's just a few things.
I agree with you wholeheartedly, Amy. In fact, I would say my best cheerleaders were my parents as well. Both my dad and mom. Like when I said I wanted to come to the U.S. to study, and they never batted an eyelid. They were like, "Yes, please go." And and anytime I've had doubts, I think they've always been there to sort of prop you up, right? And it is also this greater village, like you said, the community, right? Like the friends that you have, your partner. I think those can be huge support systems. We all need our allies. We all need our advocates, right? And I think having that community is very important. I wanted to come back to your career again. You seem to, after Nielsen, it seems like you're attracted to the startup space, right? You went to Home Chef, and then you went to Ruggables, right? So what is this about the startup culture that draws you in?
That's a great question. So at Nielsen, I feel like there was a point in time where I kind of felt like I could predict my day to day. And I think this is part of going back to your Miami being adaptable thing and like really thrown into the ringer in a really safe environment. At Nielsen, I kind of felt like I could predict what I was going to do in 6 months into a year from now, and kind of the I call it the cog in the machine, where you really know, like, here is my space, here is what I'm going to support from start to finish. And it kind of get to a point where I was like, I want to keep learning. Like I want to keep trying new things. I want to do like, crazy stuff like finance, like ops, marketing. Like I want to try new things and continue to learn. And that, like, I think is inherent to myself, and I think to a lot of people that go to Miami. And so when I joined Home Chef, it was like, we have 100 projects you can work on. They're different all across the board. We need help with figuring out how do we successfully know how much garlic we have on hand. We need to figure out like how we can like put cherry tomatoes in a bag, like, and people are cold, like all these really unique problems. And at that point in time, it was like you kind of picked your own path of what do you want to tackle first. So like, what is that prioritization matrix? Then how do you get people on board and the change management? And so what I've loved about startup is that energy, that vibrance, and that everyone's kind of owners in this small community. And so when I joined Home Chef, we were a startup, we eventually got acquired and things started to taper off again, right? Like you started to see the scope in full view. And so that's when I start to get a little itchy and then try to transition into a new startup, which was ultimately Ruggable. What I will say is it's people are scared of startups too, and they should be, right? Like startups is not for the faint of heart. You will have tough years, you will have amazing highs, but also tough lows. And so I think that's one thing to note. It's not all sunshine and roses. You do want to make sure that when you're transitioning into a startup, you feel confident about the leadership team. You feel confident about the product. You want to really, really see it succeed. Because ultimately you're going to dedicate a good chunk of your life. And I think that's for any career path too. If you feel like a sense of dread on Sundays, like, the Sunday scaries, or during the week, you kind of like, I just want to stay in bed another 20 minutes later, might not be the right space for you, may not even be the right portion of engineering. And for me, I've been very fortunate after my time at Nielsen that I haven't quite felt that way. So that's my knack for startups in a nutshell.
So Aimee, this is, something that in fact, I see this a lot in our students now, right? Current as well as past, that there is this very, they have a lot of interest in starting their own businesses or starting their own ventures. And I'd like to create an environment within the college where we nurture that. So that is something that we're working towards, and we have lots of support from our alumni, and I'm, in terms of, several of our alumni have even stepped up as mentors to our current students to advise them through some of their startup adventures, let's just say. But we're also thinking of, being part of what we call a Kern Engineering Entrepreneurship Network. So it's not about entrepreneurship, but it is about that entrepreneurial mindset that we want to cultivate in our students, right? So because you see a lot of the younger generation being very intrigued by this and have lots of great ideas that can be brought to market, right? So those are some of the things that we are thinking within the college. But so your story and your career path sort of reflects some of that we see with our students. So in terms of, like if you were to advise one of our current students, right, who is thinking of going into the space, and we have a few with ideas around this, what would you say they should do or should not do if they're starting their own venture? Yeah.
That's a great question. I think the first thing is really asking, why do you want to do this? And there's no wrong answers. What I mean by that is it could be financial, purely financial, and that should be celebrated. It could be you want to travel the world and be able to work from anywhere. It could be because you want to control this thing of yours, which is also an awesome answer. I want to have the flexibility to, hang out with my kids one day. Being able to really ask that why, I think, is like the foundation of entrepreneurship and investing an enormous amount of time, because the longer you get into this journey, the more the self-doubt starts setting in of, I've invested this much time, should I be? And so turning back to that why, I think, is number one when you're thinking about doing entrepreneurship. And so sitting folks down, asking why you would want to do this and really encourage that. I think sometimes we're like, it should be you travel the world and that's nothing else. And I don't think that's quite the right mentality. I think things to do, I think figuring out what you like to do. And what I mean by that, especially when you're a team of one or you have a partner helping support, right? Like you have two of you, another co-founder. What are you good at? And you may say like, I'm kind of good at everything. Well, if you keep avoiding the one task, chances are you may not be very good at it. And so really identifying your weaknesses. And sometimes it may be worth the $100 you pay on Upwork or Fiverr to do this outsourcing activities. So I would say that is something that I don't think is coached as often. And I think the biggest killer to startups is perfectionism.
Mm-hmm.
If you're trying to do certain things very perfect, it's probably not going to go well for you. Done is better than perfect always. And so if you can put something to market where you may not be perfectly proud of it, but you can at least sell it or try it out or have people beta test it, that is ultimately better than having something perfect. A lot of people in engineering, I would say, are recovering perfectionists. We always were taught to do the proofs on multiple pages. I still remember some of those when I've had stress dreams. But I think ultimately thinking about how do I step away from this perfectionism? I think things to ultimately do too is when you have an idea, start reading through like some of the legal, the financial. I think one of the areas that I think would be really beneficial in engineering is really like a finance class or two. Like what is EBITDA? What is profit and loss statement? Like something very small like that can go a huge way. You can learn it online, probably even TikTok, I would say, because there's a lot of really good influencers out there that are talking about these things these days. But I do think that would be really helpful. I know I took a few classes online on the side probably a few years ago, mostly just so I could get a better grasp on those.
Okay. So what about, there is always the question of capital that you need for startups, right?
Yep.
And we hear about venture capital and sometimes it can be tough and tough, especially if you're a woman in the profession, it can be even sometimes harder, right? To get some of that venture capital funding that you might need for your ideas. So have you navigated those spaces and, would you have words of advice for folks that are thinking of being in the space?
Absolutely. Especially young folks that are pitching their ideas. They are not invested in your idea. I'm going to be totally honest. They're investing in you. They will ask thoughtful questions. They want to see, do you have what it takes? Are you moldable enough to be able to make this work? Are you going to put in the hours? And so I would say spend enormous time how you're going to frame the message. What do you want to be perceived as? And because like I have done funding and you want to make sure you're aligning with someone that you also believe in. It's a two-way street. It's like anything. When you get a new job, you're also evaluating them as much as they're evaluating you. And so one, I would suggest really focusing on how you want to be perceived. Two is really focused on, is this person the right fit? I think sometimes that imposter syndrome sets in again, like, oh, I just want to please them. I want to make them feel like I'm the best solution, and maybe trying too hard to do that. And so I think collectiveness, confidence, those things will ultimately have you do that. What I will say right now, I think capital funding right now has been very difficult given the current market. And so don't be discouraged. Like it's kind of like the classic back in the day, like you have to knock on 1,000 houses for them to buy a Girl Scout cookie. Like now everyone buys Girl Scout cookies. Like it will take time and just keep your chin up. I again, not for the faint of heart, but is ultimately going to be worth it when you see your product on shelves or your software in people's hands.
So what do you think, you talked some about this, the engineering mindset, right? How does the engineering mindset help you in your day-to-day tasks, Aimee?
Yeah, that's a great question. It kind of feels natural now. What I will say about how does this engineering mindset is the process oriented. You take statics of like, you have to first look at, the upwards forces, then the downward forces, or how do you figure out how to build this end product, and how do you back into it, those steps? What is your minimum viable product, your MVP of this item? So how can I ship something that is just like, pretty small? What is the V1, the V2, the V20? I think this like slicing and dicing is taught very well in a lot of our classes. Mechanics, these are the order of operations, calculus, physics. So I think that naturally happens. I think the second thing that and this is again probably a little more fluffy, that you learn in engineering school is time management. You can study forever, right? And stay up at King all night, chug a bunch of Red Bull, which I still think of very fondly, and ultimately probably get pretty good grades, right? But when you enter industry, you can stay up all night all you want, and that may not necessarily mean you're good at your job. And I think that was a pretty big shift for me when I transitioned, of like, oh, if I study really hard and I like pump all this work out, ultimately I can do that. But I think Miami taught me like, you need to be time management sensitive, because you have so many shifting priorities, and you have after school activities, you doing all these different things. And so I think time management is something that was taught really well in engineering school, because you do have to balance a lot of things at once. So I would say those two things I think are really, really important, is being process oriented, and then the time management skills that you're ultimately learning.
I know that in the introduction, Molly didn't touch on some of your global experiences. You got some international experience as well, right, during your studies. Could you talk about some of that, and also how that has helped you as you work with some of these companies that want to have a global footprint, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So my background, my dad's French, my mom's American. And so growing up, I was very fortunate to travel a lot, seeing family in France, seeing family in the US, and spent my majority of my time in the US. In high school, I had to take a foreign language, and so I decided not to take French as a result. And so I was between Spanish and Chinese. And the way in which my mind works, I'm a pretty visual learner. I've always been. I think that's very common for engineers. I love kind of this imagery, again, was really into art, and so ultimately selected Chinese. And I was very thankful that they don't have conjugations in this language. And so it's a lot of memorization, a lot of visual studies. And so ultimately fell in love with it, found it kind of like a stress reliever when I was kind of working through a lot of my difficult courses in high school, and then ultimately knew, based on that Panda Express example, that I wanted to have at least some sort of language in my back pocket. And so decided to pursue a minor in Chinese at Miami. And I remember like when I was talking to my advisor at school, she was like, you want to double and get a minor in 4 years. All right, we'll figure out how to do this. But it was really important to me, and it was a stress reliever. And so did do that. And I traveled to China a few times, thought for sure when I graduated that I was going to work in a manufacturing environment in China. And I think the more I kind of went back, I loved the culture and the richness of it. And I loved all the friends I made. I was part of a really amazing organization called CABO, China America Business Organization. But ultimately decided that I wanted to stay stateside for my initial working experience after that. And I think for me, what it has helped in my career is being thoughtful and open to new experiences. I've made some amazing friends along the way as well. And I still hang out with my Cabo friends to this day. I'm almost 10 years out of school, and we'll see them all over the world. And so I always know I have a place to stay and chat with, of like, hey, can we chat? So I think for me, it was inherent to me because of my upbringing with my family, but I ultimately do think this communication has been really helpful, and travel has been kind of part of me. I travel a lot for work these days, and I really like it because I get to see different parts of the coin. So ultimately, I think that's the main reason why.
And it also gives you this amazing cultural perspective, right? So that especially when you travel a lot, that and as you think through even your startups or your companies, and they're thinking of going global, you can put yourself in somebody else's shoes that might be across the world who might think of
Yeah.
your product a different way, right? Because instead of just looking at it with one lens. So I think and I am a strong proponent, and I think Miami does an excellent job with this, with the study abroad and the encouragement of students to do some kind of study abroad experience. I think it truly helps. And it shouldn't be a one-off. I think what you have done is, what we would hope that lots of our students would do, that it's more of an immersive experience rather than, I'll run for 2 months somewhere and then that's it. But it's more of an immersive experience. But I'm glad to hear that, because my background is also from, I think I spent a lot of time traveling, and that's still, I think that is one aspect of my life that I truly enjoy. And I think it just enriches everything. And you tend to look at things with a very different perspective when you have that kind of a background. So it's lovely to hear that. Um, Coming back to your career in both Home Chef and Ruggables and Nielsen, what do you think in terms of? I know you talked about doing very different roles at startups, right? But can you talk about some of the, like, say, the most technical challenge that you have faced in any one of your companies, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can give a specific example. So when I joined Home Chef, one of the biggest issues they had was counting garlic. They peel garlic cloves, and people are actually peeling in a warehouse. It's quite cold, and they're putting it into baggies, and then they're basically managing inventory, thousands and tens of thousands of garlic clove baggies. And they were like, Aimee, we never know what actual number we have on hand.
Mhm.
We don't know if we have 10,000, 12,000, all that stuff. We've tried everything. We've like considered buying this machinery that's very expensive. Ultimately, how can you solve it? And I remember just thinking, this was before I even started, and it just had my wheels turning of like, I want something really cheap, but also very effective. How do we do this? And so ultimately landed on buying this machine, just a counting scale that they use for butcher shops, or they'll use it for all different reasons. But ultimately, you take the average of, call it 10, 20 garlic clove baggies, and then you take a bin, you tar it out, and then you dump everything else in. And I remember it was something that they were going to spend an enormous amount of money, and we ended up spending, I don't know, $150 on. And it was something that it took maybe, I don't know, 4 days or so. That's just one, I guess, example that's pretty concrete. I can think in my mind right now about something that should have been always very simple, but maybe over engineering it in quite a few different ways. We'll put it in this funnel and then it'll calculate all that stuff. But ultimately ended up on a live scale, just average weighing things.
And each clove can, the weight can be quite different too, right? So
Mm-hmm. Right.
so that's awesome. You never even think about some of these issues, right? Until the industry. I mean, would you even have thought, like when you were doing your mechanical engineering degree, that
No.
so
Yeah.
yeah.
Recently, someone asked me, they were like, can you 3D render this part for one of our machines here at Ruggable? And I was like, I would love to do this. Like, I haven't done this type of work in a long time. And I remember just like opening Autodesk Inventor and starting to mock it up. So it's been pretty fun.
Yeah. So if you were to, I know you haven't been out that long, but still you have been out for a few years. So if you were to give advice to one of our seniors right now, what would you say? What should they be thinking of in terms of career choices, how they evaluate which company they should work for, because most of our seniors as well as our current students have lots of choices, right? They can choose. The job market is still pretty hot in engineering and computer science, and so so how would they make this decision? How what are some of the things that they should think about?
Yeah. It's interesting. So I've been doing some mentoring recently, and I think the biggest, easiest way you can, and it's going to sound pessimistic, but write down things, make a list of things that you absolutely know you do not want to do. And what I mean by that of like, I don't want to be in the middle of nowhere was one I gave that earlier. I don't want to sit at a desk all day. Like, what are those things to you? Or like, I don't want to be on Zoom calls all day. I don't want to do like that sometimes is easier than like the I want to do, because that can feel like so many things, whether instead of like the smaller of the no's, because that'll be a much shorter list. And then I would ask questions when you're interviewing with people of like, hey, what's the work life balance? Like, what is the environment we'll be working on? Will I be on a shop floor? What is the type of people I'd be interacting with? Like, have they been there a long time? Are they new? And I think you can kind of back into figuring out like, oh, I'm for sure going to be sitting on Zoom calls all day. I don't think I necessarily want to do this because I want to be on my feet. And so I think you can really, really scale back some of those roles. And then I would say the second thing is you really want to be, you're going to be working with these people a lot. Recruiters probably not, right? Because it's a different function. But the way that they're communicating to you, do you feel like you're going to want to spend more than half your life with them for the next year to 2 years, right? I mentioned you're deciding them as much as they're deciding you, but it's true. I would also say like, are you going to feel really proud telling your family what you are going to be doing? I know, like I said, like some people will be like, oh, I'm doing this thing, and they're kind of embarrassed. You shouldn't be embarrassed. Like, it's a big part of who you are. It's going to be on your like, one pager of this is what I did. And so if you can feel confident about your choice, you want to feel confident. So I would say like, don't settle for a role just because you want to like start working immediately. Like, it may take 1-2 months extra, but you're going to be really thankful that you did. And so those are a few things I would definitely suggest. And also ask your family for their or people that you like, your support system you feel comfortable about like, do you think like this is a good fit for me? Here's some of the details, and just get their advice too, because it does take a village. What I will say about like once you graduate, there's a few things that I would definitely suggest doing. Though I know people are like, sign up for your 401k. Please sign up for your 401k. This is really important. If they say like, hey, do you want to sign up? Yes, you want to sign up. Just put as much money as you feel confident putting in, but it's important to start. I would say the second thing is, again, actively listen. Think, be a sponge. I would even say like, some people are like, oh, always say yes. If you want to say no, you can say no. Do it delicately. But being like the yes person may not always work. And then I think the last thing is assuming positive intent. I think sometimes it's like, oh, I'm doing this job, and then this other person came in and did this other job. And like, they're not doing a good job, and now they're making me feel bad. It's like, assume positive intent that everyone that's coming to work is trying to do the best they very can. And I think those are just a few things that I wish someone told me when I was first starting my career. But yeah.
That's a great pieces of advice, and I really love that assume positive intent. I think that is important too, right? So with that being said, right, like you you go in with this positive mentality, and let's say your career hits a roadblock. How do you advocate for yourself? And this might be a year or two or a couple of years out, right? How do you advocate for yourself so that you can get the right opportunities at the right time, let's say?
Yeah, it's a great question. Um, I think I always tell folks on my team about this thing called political equity, where your voice means something. And everyone knows the boy who cried wolf, or like the squeaky wheel gets the oil. It has diminishing returns. And so I always try when I'm talking to my manager, when I'm talking to others, that I am really punchy when things are really important to me. And when it's not really important to me, I kind of float in the background. And why do I do that? It's because when they know I'm saying something or I'm like pretty passionate about something, I really mean it. And I think that has helped me with advocating myself when I've wanted promotions, when I've wanted career changes. Like that to me has been really, really helpful. You have so much political equity. Think of it, it's in like a jar, and you can only give so much out of it at a time. Because otherwise people be like, oh, Aimee always complains. Like, you don't need to listen to her. It's hard because I do love to hear myself talk, i.e. like I'm an extrovert. I love to chat with folks. And so it is something that I'm very cognizant about and figure out how do we do that. Always when you go to a dinner party or you go to have, with dinner with friends, and like there's that one person that talks 70% of the time, and they're talking and talking and talking and talking, and you're like, whoa, like how do I scale it back, or you talk a little bit. As extroverts, I think it's really important to be that pause and ask those questions, so that other people talk. And I think people have been, weird since COVID, I would say. Like everyone's kind of trying to figure out what's the social scene again of, and so I think giving some grace too of like, hey, we're all just trying to figure it out. We've been cooped up for 2 years. We're still trying to get back in that rhythm. So I think that political equity really does help when you're advocating for yourself. I also think like always think through like what do you want to do long term? Like I think I really in my career I was like these stepping stones. If I do A, it'll get to B, and then B to the C. And then when I got into startup land, it was like, no, it's not this like meticulous thing. A lot of it is luck, but it's planned luck. You're thinking through, hey, do I want to go get an MBA, or do I want to get my master's or my PhD? Because I want to continue to learn. And I think that's the best avenue for learning. If that's the case, like always have it kind of in the background of it could be a thing that you're doing, right? So I think those are a few things of way I would advocate for yourself. Negotiation, there's a great book that I recommend to everyone called Never Split the Difference. It's about a bomb negotiator for the FBI. And he talks about how his time, how he was able to get out of these very stressful situations. I think that is a great book for anyone that is figuring out how do I negotiate new salaries when I'm coming out of industry as well.
Awesome advice. And I like that thing about political equity. And I think it basically comes down to pick your battles. You cannot fight every battle, right? You have to pick what is important for you and then stand up for that. And we will put in this recommendation also on that negotiation. I think it is never split the difference. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So with that being said, can you give an example of a difficult conversation you had at your place of work or with a colleague? How did you prepare yourself for that conversation? And after the conversation, I guess, what did you learn from it? Because I think these are important lessons for everyone.
Yeah, I would say I have difficult conversations probably daily. It's the natural phenomenon of being a people manager, and they just get easier. I would say there's 3 things that I would suggest you don't do. The first one is the classic sandwich example. I think we're taught at a young age of say a good thing, then say the bad thing that you're dreading to say, and then say a good thing. I'll give an example. It's like, Aimee, you did a really nice job in that presentation. You showed up 5 minutes late. I'm so glad you made that point about that one thing in the meeting. And it's like, it's wishy-washy, right? It's like, if you actually want to be like, hey, I need you to show up 5 minutes before the meeting because otherwise it makes us look like fools in this meeting, right? Just saying that is more important and punchier than having this good, bad, good. The second thing is, I'm sure a lot of people on this call are Midwesterners, myself included. We like to do the avoiding the person thing. And I'm guilty of it, as anyone else. And what that causes is you're like, okay, I'm going to avoid, I'm going to just pretend nothing's wrong. It's like a unit step function. And all of a sudden it jumps up and you are mad, too mad, probably like overreactor, like mad. And that happens. And so be cognizant of like, I'm avoiding this person because you may want to just have a brief conversation with them to relieve some of that stress, because eventually it'll catch up to you. And then I think the last one, and I always tell people this, is like, never text a coworker, like when you're, on Slack or whatever, saying, hey, can we talk? You are going to stress that person out and they're going to think that it's this huge issue when realistically it might be something really small. And instead, if you want to talk about something to give feedback, hey, can we talk about X, Y, and Z quickly? I think the easiest way to give feedback is really often in earning their trust. You don't want to be adversarial. When you're giving feedback, you don't want to be sitting directly across from that person, because that's like a direct, you're looking in front of each other. You want to be on the side of the desk. So I always try to put it like on a corner. I think it's like, hey, let's chat through that. Like, here's the issue that I see. How can you and I as a team work together so that doesn't happen anymore? Like, hey, you showed up to this meeting 5 minutes late and you've consistently showed up 5 minutes late. Like, what's going on? Like, let's chat about it. How can we do this? And here's why you need to do this. And here's the downstream ramifications. I had someone on the team not too long ago that like doesn't respond back to messages in a timely fashion. It could be hours later. And it's because they're, very focused on writing, quality code. But as a result, all of these people that are new junior engineers just perceive this person as like not interested in working with me, not interested in talking with me. And so pulling that person aside and saying like, hey, like, we've gotten multiple people mentioning, you don't mention names, that are you're not responding in a timely manner. And here's why this is important. People feel like they can't trust you. They feel like you're not interested in working with them, that you're standoffish. How do we work together so that this is more comprehensive? And then I try to be as punchy with the tactical things too, of like, do you want me to like help bring in a new integration where it like notifies you more prevalently? Is it because you're taking lunch break during that time? Like, maybe block out your calendar so they know you're taking lunch. Like, here are some examples of how you can resolve this issue. And let's like review this in a week or two, just make sure that we're on the same page, that there's progress been made here, and always make sure that they are aligned with it. Those are just some of, like, I think, examples I would give. And I would really, really suggest, like, you have to earn their trust, especially when you're people managing. They don't gain your trust. You have to earn their trust.
Yeah.
So that's how I would suggest dealing with difficult conversations, but they will happen. So be ready.
Awesome. So I'm sure you have seen this, right? As a result of the pandemic, how have you seen your workplace change, your colleagues change? Because this is a question, in fact, I think Lockheed Martin Leadership Institute students, they tackled looking at the future of work, right? So how do you see yourself? Like, what do you think this pandemic has done in terms of how we think of work and what the future might look like?
Yeah, it's interesting. I would say back in the day, it was like, I remember I had someone in my college experience telling me, well, you can only pick between your life or your work. You can't have both. And that singed in my brain. And I had a lot of hatred built up for a long time of being like, I'm not a spiteful person, but I'm going to prove that is not the case.
Mm-hmm.
it was always very important to me that long term in my career, and I haven't hit it quite yet. Like I want to get to a point where I can work 3 to 4 days and I can spend the same amount of time with my family. And that is very, very important to me. That's like my North Star. I like want to be able to do that. That is like, I want to have a very successful career, but also be able to do this, proving of the point of spending time with my family. I think the pandemic has really helped with that. I think boundaries have been set way better than they ever have been before. I know when I was the beginning of the pandemic, I used to fly to LA every week because my company's based in LA. I had a quality of life improvement where all of a sudden I can work from my pajamas. My commute was, 2 steps from my bed to my desk. And I started working really late. Like I would wake up and start working at 8, and then I was working till like 8 or 9. And my employer did not say, Aimee, you need to work till 8 or 9. It was just like, there's nothing else to do. Like can't go anywhere. I was in my, my little box in Chicago, like might as well hang out in here. And so I started working later and later. And at probably like 6 to 8 weeks, I was like, this isn't going away. Like I need to set healthier boundaries. It's important. Like I can't, I want to be able to spend time with my family. Like I can't do this. And so ultimately started scooching up like, hey, here's my hard deadline. It's at 6 o'clock. Then it became 5:30. And I think this pandemic has helped significantly with that. And so I hope moving forward, we continue to set these healthy boundaries. I think America as a country is way behind other countries, way behind. And so I think that was a small step. I do hope it continues that way. And we see similar, vacation to countries like in Europe.
Yes.
Because I ultimately do think it leads to more lifetime happiness and a happier population. So I think that's one of the biggest things that has changed since the pandemic.
I agree with you. In fact, when I finished my PhD, after a little bit of time, I went to work in Norway, and I worked there for a year. And I can tell you, it's a different work culture. But I mean, they are as productive or equally productive, but they make sure that their vacation time is not, they protect it, and everybody sees that as, it should be protected. There is, and the same thing with, even in, this was the late 1990s, and we had little children in our workplace, some days when the father or a mother had to bring them in because they didn't have anywhere else to take them. And it was very common. Nobody batted an eyelid. Nobody batted an eyelid when, you did get a lot more time for maternal as well as paternal family leave and so those kinds of things. So yeah, it definitely things that we can learn. And I'm hoping the pandemic is a turning point, that we do use this. Because I think all of us have figured out how to be productive in very different formats. And I think some of the studies I've seen is there wasn't much loss in productivity. Maybe there might have been initially when we were all trying to figure it out, but after that we figured it out, and so it is possible to do that. So I appreciate that from you as well. I know we're coming up to the end of our time here, but if you had a crystal ball, Aimee, where do you see your career going next? What might be next steps?
Yeah. So I've worked at 2 successful, I would say, startups now. It's a lot of work, like I said earlier. It is a lot of work. I think it's such fulfilling work. I think one of the biggest things that I've seen is I'd love to advise other startups of how they can be successful and what is the building block, specifically in the tech space. Like, again, good is better than, done is better than perfect. And so really help support them. I can see a world in which I'm coaching at, advisory to new startups. I think that would ultimately be my like long-term path for all, and I consider myself successful and just spend more time focusing on flexibility. I think, again, the pandemic allowed more folks to travel, work from wherever. And I did take advantage, but maybe not enough advantage of what I wish I could have done. And so I think that is ultimately what I'd love to do long term. And maybe I'll do another startup one day. And we'll see. But for now, I'm loving my job where I am. I love my team. I feel very fortunate for my career choices thus far. And again, a lot of it is luck. Like, I don't want to say it has been a lot of work, but it has been also been very fortunate. So that's ultimately what I would believe. What about you? Like, now that you're, our first woman dean, I'd love to hear like how you ultimately like got into this role. Like, what do you think long term is your career path?
So, for me, I think I did work in industry for a little time. I worked in the offshore oil industry. So, in fact, looking at installing foundations for deep sea platforms. So that's how it took me from the US to Norway because they had already done some of that work in the North Sea, and we were trying to do it in the Gulf of Mexico at that time. But I think it was the students that drew me back. For me, education was sort of in my DNA, I would say, and I always think the students always come first. That's how I've always thought about it. So that's how I interviewed at Bowen, my previous institution. So I did move from the Northeast to the Midwest. So I was laughing when you talked about the Midwestern culture. Because, you know how the Northeast is. We tend to rush through things, and we're not that pleasant sometimes.
Oh.
We can be more upfront, and so it's been we think of the United States as one country, but there is cultural differences across regions, and and so I've run into some of that as well. But it's been amazing to be here, and I would say, in terms of the college, we are at a very hopeful time. That's how I feel. I feel, very fortunate. Like every day I pinch myself that I get to come to work and do something I love, and to be around people I love. Right? I love my colleagues, my faculty, staff, my students that I get to work with. Every single Miami alum that I've met with, I always say the first question they start off with is, "How can I help you?" And to me, that just shows that generosity of spirit. So I do find myself in this very fortunate place. And if you had asked me, when I was doing my undergraduate in India, if this is what I would be doing 30 plus years from there, no, so I do pinch myself every day. I consider myself very fortunate to be at Miami, to lead this college. Not thought about next steps, the reason I actually came back into engineering because I was the VP for research at my previous institution. I missed the students, and I also felt like I had unfinished work in the engineering profession because it's so important for us to have women leaders in the profession. Because, whatever we might say, role models do play, it has a huge impact on generations that follow you. So I've taken that role also rather seriously. And that was my reason for coming back into the engineering space when after I left it for a 2-3 year window. Because I did feel like, this is my space, and there's still lots of unfinished work that we need to do. So with that, I think, we're coming to the end of our time. I've truly enjoyed this conversation with you, Aimee, and I hope to meet you in person, sometime soon. Hopefully, maybe out in LA, or
Come visit Chicago. No, I need to come back to Oxford soon.
Or we get you to come back to Oxford because
I'd love
the
to.
students would love to meet you and hear about your experiences. So I appreciate your time. And to all our alums that are out there that might be listening, especially our women alums. Happy International Women in Engineering Day to all of them, and for all the amazing work that you do. Please continue with that excellent work that you do.
Well, thank you, Aimee and Beena. We do appreciate you being here to celebrate the day with us and all that the day means, particularly to women engineers. That's all the time we have. And as a reminder, a recording of this presentation will be available on our website later today. Please check out this and other webinar presentations at alumlc.org/MiamiOH. And to learn more about the 18 of the Last 9 Award program, please visit miamialum.org and look for the 18 of the Last 9 Award under the Events tab. And do stay tuned for nomination submission later this summer. Thank you for joining us all. Love and honor, and have a great day. Thanks so much.
Thank you.